Over on Purple Insider, a new Vikings history video is out about the time that Bud Grant, during a game against the Detroit Lions, only showed up to the game 5 minutes before kickoff. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. When a team is losing, and when a team is in the middle of a really bad slump, what do you hear the players saying to the media afterwards? You hear things like, "We've got to get it together," or "We've got to tighten things up," or "It starts with me, and I didn't play great, and I have to play a whole lot better," or something like that. You might even hear the optimistic side, where the players talk about things that are bigger than football, or where the players express optimism that things are going to turn around, saying things like, "We're not far off. We're only a few plays away from being a good team. And the guys are still fighting. We still believe in each other, and morale is still high." In other words, you will never hear the players flat out say, "Yeah, the season's over. We stink. We're toast. Pack it up." That is, unless you're a player on this team that you've been watching the whole time, the 1999 Denver Broncos. Again, you would think that comments like that would be a very, very bad idea for a variety of reasons. They create locker room drama and tension. They instill a sense of disbelief, a sense of giving up, and a revolt against the current regime. They provide fans with no hope, because why should the fans care if you don't care? And why should the fans believe that things can get better if you don't believe that yourself? And unlike the fans, you actually have the power to change that. But in the middle of the horrible 1999 season, a drama occurred between the Broncos and Sports Illustrated, where SI published the quote that made rounds, and caused an absolute firestorm just months after the Broncos were on top of the football world. Because this is the story behind the controversy between the Denver Broncos and Sports Illustrated. Before I talk about the actual drama in question, we need some context to understand just how bad the Denver Broncos were to begin with. For years, the Broncos were a football powerhouse. They were consistently good throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, and in recent years, under the guidance of head coach Mike Shanahan, they were a staple of good football, as in the past 3 seasons, from 1996 to 98, they had a record of 39-9, winning a whopping 81% of their games. Most importantly, they won back-to-back Super Bowls, winning Super Bowl 32 against the Green Bay Packers, and following that up with a win at Super Bowl 33 against the Atlanta Falcons, in a game that you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. While the expectations weren't quite as high for the Broncos in 1999, coming off of their second straight title, mainly because of the retirement of quarterback John Elway, and the massive question mark that now sprung up in the most important position in the game, and because of the loss of the heart of their defense, Pro Bowl safety Steve Atwater, they were still projected to be a solid team that at the very least could make the playoffs. Yeah, that did not happen, as you've been able to tell from these lowlights. From 1996 through 98, the most losses the Broncos had in a season was in 1997, when they had 4. Through the first 4 games of 1999, they had already equaled that total. There are some teams that have Super Bowl hangovers and play some poor football, disappointing 1 year after winning it all. Teams prior to the Broncos like the 1968 Packers, 1982 49ers, and 1981 Raiders come to mind, the latter of which you can learn more about just how bad they were by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And then there's whatever the heck the Broncos were doing, who were the first defending Super Bowl champion in a full season to ever start a season with an 0-4 record. Following home losses to the Miami Dolphins and New York Jets, the first of which was in front of a national television audience on ABC on Monday Night Football, and road losses to the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Broncos found themselves not at the top of the football world, but rather at the very bottom, in the basement of the league. Through 4 weeks, the Broncos were one of 5 winless teams. They had an inept offense that scored just 54 points, which was not just a bottom 5 total in the NFL, but was the second worst total in the AFC, only besting the Cleveland Browns, who were, for all intents and purposes, an expansion team that year. Their point differential of -44 was in the bottom 5 in football, and their defense, which was 8th in the league in 1998 in points allowed, was in the bottom 5 of the league, having already allowed 98 points, or just slightly under 25 points per game. Terrell Davis, coming off of a 2,000-yard season that some consider to be the greatest by any running back ever, had just 211 yards on 3.1 yards per carry, well off his 2,000-yard pace and the pace that everyone had grown accustomed to. And he was placed on injured reserve after that 4th game, as he was going to miss the remainder of the season with a knee injury. Whether it was Brian Griese or Bubby Brister at quarterback, it was a pick-your-poison kind of deal, because both options were terrible under center. Case in point, the Jets game, which the Broncos lost 21-13, where Denver's quarterbacks combined to throw 5 interceptions, and the quarterbacks turned it over 4 times in the 4th quarter alone, with 3 interceptions and a strip sack. Only one team in NFL history, the 1992 San Diego Chargers, had ever come back from an 0-4 start to make it to the playoffs. And it sure as heck wasn't looking like the Broncos were going to be the second, due to a poor offense, a poor defense, and the injury bug. The conversation wasn't about whether the Broncos could three-peat and become the first team in the Super Bowl era to do this. The conversation was about whether the Broncos were the worst defending champion of all time. Which takes us to what happened after that Jets game. Because after the game, the players met with Michael Silver, a reporter for Sports Illustrated, and had dinner together with him at the Chop House, which is about 2 miles from the stadium that they just lost at. This was a fairly large group of players, as roughly 15 people, or one at just about every position, were having dinner together. And the mood afterwards at the dinner was not really one of anger, which surprised Silver, but one of dark humor and acceptance of the situation. Because during the dinner, instead of talking about things not related to football, or talking about the game and how poor the season's been, and what can be done to improve it, the players were talking about how, flat out, this team stunk and was completely dead in the water. I mean, this was the cover of Sports Illustrated that week, and this wasn't a clickbait piece, or a quote taken completely out of context. It's not like a player said, "Reporters think we're finished, but we're not," and Silver took the "we're finished" part but omitted everything else. Nope, this was completely 100% legit. At the dinner, one player said, "We're done," and picked up a salad fork, sticking it against his chest, as if to indicate that you could stick a fork in us. Another player, who was a starter on the team, said, "See that big tank on the right? That's exactly where I'm headed." And perhaps the worst of them all, one veteran defender said, "We could very easily go 0-8, maybe finish 3-13. I hate to say it, but we're finished." And it wasn't just one player. Again, about 15 people were at this dinner and told him that the season was over. Just like that, what was supposed to be a normal dinner conversation after the game, possibly to get to know a little bit more about the players and whatnot, turned into national news. Because Silver wrote this story, used those quotes, and in big letters, the message was clear and could not be avoided. The Broncos were toast. They didn't believe in themselves. They knew that they were done. And to say that there was outrage over this by everyone involved would be an understatement. Because you had 2 incidents of outrage going on. First, you had head coach Mike Shanahan upset at his players for not buying in and for believing that they were done. And second, you had the players upset at Silver and Sports Illustrated for publishing the story, believing that everything that was said during dinner was entirely off the record, and that Silver was acting incredibly slimy to get the story. Let's start with Shanahan first, because his reaction to the players and their lack of belief was about what you'd expect. Shanahan had a meeting with his team and said, "Hey, I don't know if someone said that, but if someone feels like we're going to be 0-8 or we're going to wind up 3-13, please let me know. I'll send you out of here so quick. I don't care if you want a bus ticket or a plane ticket. Just let me know." Translation: if you said that quote, or I find that you were the one that said that quote, you're done. Goodbye. We don't want you. Not surprisingly, no one stepped forward, so the anonymous player who said that quote was a complete mystery. However, seeing as Silver said that a veteran defender said it, that at least narrowed the field of possibilities down somewhat. But aside from Shanahan and his understandable outrage, the players were furious at Silver, for they felt that he betrayed their trust and burned every future bridge. Said defensive end Alfred Williams, "It was terrible. It was a bad way of doing business between people who you were taking to dinner. I wouldn't expect any of my dinner conversations to come up in any newspaper, no matter what the situation was." Fullback Howard Griffith was equally frustrated about this story, and said, "The disturbing part is that's going to be the feeling throughout the country. The cover of that magazine pretty much says it all, and that's the way we're going to be portrayed. People are going to think the whole team feels that way, but that's not the case." And running back Derek Lovell said, "We're getting hit from every angle. People in the media are taking jabs at us now. That's fine, because there's going to come a time when we're back on top, and everyone will be patting us on the back." It's important to note in all of this that Silver did not actually believe that the Broncos were going to quit, and he took the quotes to mean something completely different. Said Silver after the article dropped in a defense of his work, "I'm not saying these quotes mean the Broncos will quit. I liken it to that feeling when you're falling off a cliff, and just when you realize you're about to crash land, you have some fun in your free fall. I don't take it literally." Silver then added that he stood by the quotes because when you start a season 0-4 and have the dysfunction that the Broncos had right after winning the Super Bowl, it's not a real surprise that people feel this way. As he said, "I heard similar things from other people. If Mike Shanahan is as aware of what's going on as he thinks he is, it should not come as a real surprise." However, the damage was done. And to be fair, it's not like the first part of that explanation with the cliff and the freefall made things any better in the eyes of the players, because that was the equivalent of saying, "Well, we're going to stink, so we might as well have some fun with it." And for what it's worth, while the Broncos did not go 0-8 and 3-13 as that one player predicted, they did go 6-10, having a poor season and missing the playoffs, becoming the first defending Super Bowl champion since the New York Giants at the start of the decade to miss the postseason. Whether you're on the side of Mike Silver and Sports Illustrated or the side of the Denver Broncos is up to you. On one hand, these quotes came during a dinner conversation, not an actual sit-down interview. On the other hand, the quotes were entirely factual and in the appropriate context. It's not as though Silver made up these quotes out of thin air. Heck, no one even denied that the quotes were said. Someone said it, and someone believed it. The dinner was being held at a public place. Theoretically, anyone could have gotten the quote if they were there and overheard the conversation. So it's not as though he did anything wrong or immoral here. It wasn't really a private conversation. At no point did Silver take an off-the-record conversation and put it in the article. The players never said anything about being off the record and wanting Silver to respect those wishes. And Silver wasn't fishing for these answers by asking questions or getting them to respond a certain way or by getting them drunk enough so they provide information with no filter. He was just observing and literally doing his job. It's hard to really say that Silver did anything wrong here. And while I guess it's understandable that the players were upset about this and being front page news, the very easy way to not have that be the story is to not say things like that around a reporter in a public space. But again, whoever side you're on is up to you. Having said that, The 1999 Denver Broncos were a really bad team, and it was very clear after 4 games that despite winning the past 2 Super Bowls, this year there was not going to be a silver lining. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.